There had been others before. The first, called simply The Werewolf, from 1913, was a Canadian short film about a Navajo woman that turns into a werewolf to fight white settlers. I say was because the last known copy was destroyed in a fire in 1924. The one most remembered, though, is Werewolf of London, from 1935. It seemed to establish the rules of the curse, but the effects used to transform Lon Chaney Jr. into a werewolf in The Wolfman just a few years later, in 1941, set the bar and eclipsed, pun intended, most of what had come before. In many ways, American Werewolf in London would do the same 40 years later. Sure, people remember the transformation in The Howling, but Werewolf in London was so transformative, pun intended, that a few of the other werewolf movies released that year would have a hard time finding room to breathe, and every werewolf transformation after that would be compared to it. Even now, another 40 years later, it hasn't been beat, mostly due to the fact that CGI became all the rage soon after, and most movies chose to forego practical effects in the coming decades. There are some great standouts. I've always been partial towards the scene in Ginger Snaps, but that came much later. If you want to see what I mean, you need only look at the transformation in American Werewolf in Paris. All that being said, we're here to talk about the quartet of werewolf movies that 1981 brought us. And thank Hollywood for doing the thing it likes to do, periodically flooding the market with the same idea. It's interesting that in the middle of the slasher craze, we get this hiccup of werewolf movies. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of these movies, coming out in such close proximity to each other, is how different they are. I don't want to spill too much because we'll break each movie down individually in the series. Up first that year is The Howling, a movie about a werewolf commune/cult in the woods, which, by the way, was just 2 years after the Jonestown incident. The Howling unpacks a lot of topics. Identity. We see multiple people and their journey dealing with being or becoming werewolves. It's man versus nature, and our primal aspects versus the human world of rights and wrongs. Things we accept without challenging. And lots of sex. The Howling also digs into the media quite a bit. 1981 being the early years of cable television news. CNN just began the year before. The werewolf angle is used by the network to sensationalize violence, but also to cover up and mislead, as we see in the final scene of the film. Dr. George Wagner, head of the colony, also uses television to run a self-help program. I don't know, man. Things haven't changed that much since this movie. Wolfen is the next on the docket, and its focus is on the urban decay of New York at that time, more specifically the Bronx. It attempts to contrast the greed of developers versus the people struggling to eke out a living in those areas. Wolfen also tries to incorporate more of an ecological and mystical element by nodding towards the Native American shapeshifters and their sacred bond with the earth, tying into its previous message quite nicely. Also, a movie that resonates quite well today. Then, you have the third werewolf movie that year, American Werewolf in London. Werewolf in London also focuses on identity as one of its themes, but not in the same way as The Howling. Here is a stranger in a strange land, a tourist becoming isolated in a country he doesn't fully understand. It's also about survivor's guilt and Jewish persecution. So far, we're tackling some pretty big topics with these movies. But before our minds are blown, let me introduce you to the lesser-known werewolf film that year, Full Moon High, a parody that focuses on the generational gap between the 1950s and the 1980s, such as the sexual revolution and the Cold War, while also focusing on identity and belonging. 4 wildly different movies, but all with something to say. I find many of our classic monsters, vampires, werewolves, and the like, are representative of so much, and used as tools to talk about things the artists feel we need to hear. Much how Jason is the morality police, and Freddy combs through your thoughts. Our classic monsters are there to tell us about ourselves, where we are and what we're doing, or doing wrong in most cases. These movies in particular are a fascinating look into the world we were leaving and the world we were entering in the early 80s. It was a transformative period of time. Suddenly, we were able to watch movies at home, on command, with your VHS or Beta. We were able to cook meals in minutes, thanks to microwaves. Wireless phones took the stage, and technological wonders seem to happen every day. In the 70s, we had pet rocks, and in the 80s, we had Teddy Ruxpin. Dramatic changes happened quickly, and much like in these movies, people struggled to find their identity within this turmoil. Honestly, I feel like a lot of people still struggle with these issues. Technology hasn't stopped bringing us together, as well as pulling us apart. I'm extrapolating a lot here, but hey, that's what I'm supposed to do. First and foremost, know that I'm a child of the 70s. My favorite pair of pants as a kid were burgundy red corduroy bell-bottoms. I was there. A kid maybe, but I remember. These 4 movies all hit around the same time, and all were trying to tell us about where we were going and or where we had come from. The thing I love about horror movies, and I hope this comes across, is their ability to talk to future generations about the struggle from their time and place. Horror and comedy have always been bellwethers for our current climate, and 2 of these are horror comedies. More than any other genre, horror talks about our fears, and quite often our fears are change and intentionally or unintentionally being left behind. These movies tackle sexuality, guilt, anti-Semitism, the ever-present fear of nuclear war in the 80s, gentrification, lack of cultural awareness, and ultimately the fear of change. I recommend giving them a watch. They hold up today. Wolfen I'm especially taken aback by, to be honest, but even Full Moon High has moments that totally speak to our current climate, even though it's quite a drop in quality compared to the others. So over the next few weeks, I'll be breaking each movie down as best I can. If you're up for it, it could be a fun ride. So in chronological order, we start with The Howling. See you soon.